Just whatever. Okay, well, I'm so glad to be here. And, you know, it's interesting talking about this from an emergency preparedness perspective because the more that I've studied about natural yeast and about grains, I just learned so much more that really seriously applies to emergency preparedness, to self-sufficiency, to being able to be in a position to take care of yourself and your own and others in a time of need. So, you know, I kind of got into this because I had heard a news snippet about some of the negative side effects that people were beginning to experience from eating whole wheat products, and it was on NPR. I'm kind of an NPR fan. I listen to it all the time, and they were talking about all these cases across the world of villages and all these places where people had reverted back to a whole wheat diet and were basically dying from it. There was one case in particular they were citing. It was a small town in Ireland where the entire village had moved back to whole wheat consumption. They said, we don't want to be unhealthy, we're going to get rid of white flour, and we're just going to do whole wheat. The problem was they didn't then also switch back to their traditional ways of bread making. So they were just shipping in whole wheat flour. And what happened is, at first it was great, but then as the younger generation began to grow, the children began to be very ill. They started having digestive illnesses, they started having celiac disease, they started having malnutrition problems, and the big problem was they began to have rickets. And they just could not understand how these little children were developing this disease that's an end-of-life problem. You know, how could they be having this bone density problem at such a young age? And the NPR snippet kind of, they got kind of 3/4 of the way, and they said, oh, well, you know, we did all this research, and it's the wheat. It's whole wheat. Whole wheat will kill you. Don't eat it. Just stick with white flour and everything will be fine. And then it was like, and on to other news, and I was like about to shake my radio, you know, like, no, that can't be the answer, tell me more. Because that just didn't make sense to me, that how had civilizations for thousands and thousands and thousands of years developed and survived and thrived on a whole grain diet, a whole grain culture. And then not until now, when we hardly eat whole wheat anymore, was it really starting to all of a sudden kill us. It just didn't make any sense. And so I began to do a lot of research. And my primary motivation at the time was I have a son that was born 3 months early. He was in the hospital for a long time, came home with a lot of health problems. And you know, all the medications that he was on were really inhibiting his growth. And I was trying to do everything I could as his mom to maximize his nutrition. And so when I heard that about those children in Ireland, they're like, don't give your kids whole wheat. I mean, I just was beside myself because I've been baking whole wheat bread for him and thinking, oh, I'm such a good mom and I'm doing all these wonderful things for him. And here now this news report was saying that I was doing something that was maybe harmful for him. And so I am kind of a geek. I like learning about things. I like studying things. It's a challenge. I have to go after it until I understand it. And so that's kind of how I got my nickname, which is the bread geek. I get really passionate about bread. I love learning about nutrition and traditional ways of keeping our families healthy. And so that's kind of how I embarked on this path of natural yeast. One thing led to the next, led to the next. One piece of research led to another. And before I knew it, I had come upon something that made a lot of sense to me and made a lot of sense in truth in terms of the word of wisdom. Because I had gotten to this point where, you know, not to be blasphemous in any way, but I felt like Joseph Smith. Or I felt like I was surrounded by all these churches that were saying, low here, low there, you know, this is truth, this is truth. All these people saying, wheat is good, wheat is bad, soy is good, soy will kill you. And I just could not make any sense of it. And finally, I decided I'm just going to study the word of wisdom and pray about every little thing, and I'm going to let the Lord bring truth into my life. And then I'm going to pray about that, and I'm going to act on what I find, and I'm going to continue down that path that way. And that was how, that was the approach I took. And I started to read it, and of course I got to the part where it says, which is wheat for the man. wheat for man. And okay, well that's good enough for me, right? But so how does that explain all of these problems that we're beginning to have with wheat? If wheat is for man, then why are people getting sick from wheat? And so I began to study about natural yeast, and my research led that way. So I'm here to teach you about natural yeast. My focus is natural yeast. It's about wheat and preparing your wheat. But this applies to so many other whole grains. The reason that whole wheat is at the forefront of the media spectacle right now is because as an American culture, we're kind of monogamous in our grains. We eat wheat, and that's about it. Sometimes oatmeal, but mostly just wheat. And so that's why all the attention right now is on wheat. If we were a primarily spelt community, if we were a primarily Kamut community, we'd be seeing the same problems of intolerances with these grains because we're not preparing them the right way. And here's a key, and I'll tie this in again later near the end, of why this is so critical to emergency preparedness, is because what do you have in your food storage? You've got wheat, and chances are you've got other grains. Maybe you've got corn, maybe you've got oats, maybe you've got all these other grains that in order to give you maximum nutrition in a time of need, in a time of crisis, have to be prepared properly. What has happened in our society is we've stopped preparing food. We just cook it. Or in terms of my friend, she says, I don't cook, I just heat. And we've moved away from preparation. We've moved kind of into cooking and then towards just heating. If it can go in the microwave, it's dinner. Or if it comes hot, even better, right? So we have to move back to the preparation phase because that's where we've gotten lost. And that's where natural yeast comes in. Because this is how, for 6,000 years, civilizations have prepared their wheat. How they were able to do it with maximum nutrition. Sometimes I've heard people say, like, oh, that's just the way they did it before they had our technology. Like they just didn't know any better, and they act like pioneer women had like all this time on their hands to just like sit around and babysit bread. Like, well, I don't have anything to do today. I'll just sit and watch this dough rise for 6 hours. Which is absolutely not true. There was so much involved in survival. Our ancestors did not have time to waste preparing or consuming food that wasn't maximally nutritious or that could be harmful to them. And there were cultures passed down from generation to generation that taught families how to prepare their food in the best way possible. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that we thought, hey, we can box it, package it, make it chemical, and make it easy and quick. And that's kind of where we've started to have a problem with some of our digestive problems. So as I go through this, I'm going to try to move as quick as I can. This is such a huge topic, and like I said, I'm a big geek when it comes to this stuff, so I kind of get off on tangents. Sometimes I'm going to try to rein myself in. Also, I do like it when you have questions. I know it's a big group, so it can kind of feel awkward, like raising your hand. But please do, because every group has its own set of questions, its own set of issues that people have questions about. So please ask your questions. If I'm not explaining something where you can understand it easily, please ask, because that will help to guide the discussion. We'll never be able to cover everything that I could cover about this. So let's cover what is important to you. Okay, so make sure and ask questions along the way. And what we're going to go over, we're going to go over the what, the why, and the how of natural yeast baking. And the what and the why are kind of the most critical parts, because unless you understand what natural yeast is, and unless you understand why it's important to do it, the how is going to be irrelevant. Because, I mean, let's be honest, if baking with natural yeast was the easiest thing you could do with your time, there would be no market for commercial yeast or store-bought bread. There just wouldn't. There's a reason that became popular to do, because it takes a little preparation, it takes a little thinking ahead, it takes a little self-education. It's not the easiest thing you could do with your time, but it is one of the most important things that you can do to help maximize your family's nutrition if you're going to be eating whole wheat, okay? So, let's get right